bringing online right now that I think are going to be interesting to watch in the next few weeks and months because they're, we've seen a
I'm gonna push back just a slight bit because I think everything you said is correct. Um, when you look at the way that UAV technology evolved, right? I mean, General Atomics was probably leading edge. They were making UAVs for the U.S. government before they were bought by the United States Air Force. And this was a guy who actually was using snowmobile engines and is making these things in his garage, and it was unbelievable. All the UAVs that have been bought up until the Russian and Ukrainian war, though, have been bought with the intent by the buyer that these things have some level of survivability, that they're not one and dones, that these things I can maximize flight time, I can maximize range, I can maximize data bandwidths of what these things are going to be able to do. Where I think Ukraine's in a very different place right now. And this is why I was really excited about these two UAVs. I'm far more excited than Alex, evidently, and that's okay. Um, if one of these things that looks like the Cessna takes off with a Rotex engine out of Austria and starts flying into Russia, even if they do see it on an S300 or S400 radar screen, they're going to have to either shoot it or they're going to have to eat it. And what I mean by eat it is they're going to have to accept it's going to have to land somewhere, and its payload's going to land. There's an argument right now that Russia is just launching as many drones as they can at Ukraine, hoping to be able to eat into that integrated air defense system and eat away all their missiles so that they don't have anything left. I would argue it's not necessarily a bad tactic. I think that they're inclined to think that the West isn't going to keep supplying them, but that's okay. The reason I say I think it's a relatively decent strategy, tactic, operation is because I think Ukraine should be doing the same thing. And if they can build hundreds of these things every year, or even more, because when you look at them, they don't look that technologically advanced. There's a cost-effective way to eat into S300 and S400 missiles.
Perfect. And I think I effectively put the link into the nest real quick so people could take a look at these particular drones that we were just discussing. And I guess, to the broader point, again, you want to use everything that you can. And what is the advantage I think that the Ukrainian military has is to be able to use, us, right, the West and other countries as leverage in these particular areas. Organically, they're growing their own programs, obviously. So I think it's kind of you kind of have the jab with using other programs, and then the punch has been coming from their own organic assets. Latin. Just a couple of thoughts on these UAVs, because I only first saw them a couple of days ago on Twitter. But as I understand it, they're being accepted into service. And I may have that wrong, but that's what I think the news was this week. But when I first saw them, the first thing I thought of was, in the Second World War and then in Korea, the Soviets and North Koreans respectively used a very primitive biplane. As in Russia, they were flown by a unit called the Night Witches, or female pilots, and their purpose was not to fly in daytime when air defenses and enemy aircraft were a real threat. They were flying at night at treetop level, very dangerous missions, and their purpose was to harass the German lines, and they were very effective at it because if you can prevent your enemy from getting a good night's sleep, any disruption is useful to you. And that was the first thing. That's not based on anything I heard from a Ukrainian source. It was when I saw it. That was my first thought: is the Russians have all these entrenched positions, and these things would be ideal for buzzing around at all ungodly times of the day, giving them a hard time. So I don't know. It could be that may be what somebody in the Ukrainian military is thinking. We'll see. Alex, what are your thoughts?
I think all those points are valid. Somebody would have to find a way to use it. I'm not sure how many they can make, how many that company can make, but we'll have to see. I hope they find a use for them, to be honest. I mean, it's good to have an airframe that has already flown, right? Some of the projects we're hearing about now are not even at that stage, so I'll certainly give them that. At least they have a working aircraft. And as far as payload or tactics, I think those are things that could be worked on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in terms of like, we talk about layered defenses and all this other stuff, but kind of this layered drone approach, if you will, or unmanned aerial vehicles to whatever flavor, you can see that these tactical ones, if you want to call them that, are definitely could be more effective with potential future operations as they move eastward to the border. Uh, I think you had your hand up. Did you? No. Okay. What about Axel? What do you think? I don't know if I just put you on the spot if you're shoveling
No,
snow right
sorry,
now.
Carlos. I was just attending to an errand here at home. Give me 3 minutes.
Okay, no worries. Sorry about that. We'll continue with this. So, Latin, I guess my question for you is, in terms of, we had the Tu-141s, right? And so we've talked about how that was easier to adapt, if you will, to weaponize it. If what are your further thoughts on, like, let's say you get all these systems into theater, and this is going to be a real thing, right? Deconfliction of this stuff. Have you given a thought to that deconfliction of the airspaces over the tactical portion of the battlefield?
Sorry, Carlos, I don't understand the question.
So in other words, these drones, some are medium altitude, some are low altitude, and now you have your rotary wing out there. So if I'm let's say a company commander, if you will, and I have these certain assets that I have control over, I may not be integrated all the way with the rotary guys who are working, or let's just say, some of the more strategic assets as well, right? And there's different altitudes everybody's going to work at. Right now, everybody's forced to work in a lower altitude environment. So have you seen anything or read anything about potential deconfliction for these things, having all these assets over the battlefield, if you will?
And again, we're talking about the drones, right? These new drones that Ukraine is bringing online.
Yeah, I'm talking about the new drones, and then you have some limited rotary, but hopefully we'll be able to see more of that start to come into effect as they start to move, continue to shape, and they can gain some more of that air parity.
You're talking about rotary drones?
Not rotary drones, actually piloted. Because if you think about it, you have all those pilots who are going to fly these missions, and now you have a lot more drones on your side, not as well as the other side. You know what I mean? The air is becoming pretty dense at times with the tactical drones, not just the ones that are done for these in mass strikes, if you will.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have an answer to that one. Sorry.
No worries. What about you, Jeff?
God, I got nothing.
Okay, I've got something. So this is where I'll see if I can find one of the articles that I found recently, but this is where the C2 piece of this has really come into its own. And I think the reason we're starting to see a lot more drone or UAV activity in terms of wanting to make them more prolific on the battle space is because they're working really well right now with being able to identify things and control things in the airspace. And I think this has just been something that's happened over time, and the volume gets turned up. The capability is starting to get there. And so instead of a degradation of their air defenses, we're seeing it obviously become more of a force multiplier. And I think this is why the Ukrainian military is starting to be able to want to integrate these systems more, and the demand signal has gone up. And I think that's kind of where I was just driving with that. Axel, are you any good with the C2 part of air control? I'm sorry, I meant Alex. Alex.
No experience with that.
Darn. So we need to get a command and control guy probably when we're up here. But anyways, I'll go ahead and just shelve that one for now. Latin, I guess you were kind of alluding to the F-16 piece, and I kind of want to see where you were going to go with that.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of talk about that, and we do talk a lot about it on this space. It really looks as though right now there are three potential sources. No, correction, two, because one has really been spoken for by Romania. So that's the F-16s from Norway. The only two batches that appear to be available right now of secondhand F-16s from NATO are coming from the Netherlands and Denmark. And as I started to look into that this week, dig into it a little more, I started to find that really the direction it seems to be going in is, I think that we're moving towards emptying what's left of Eastern European stocks of MiG-29s. So that would be coming primarily from Bulgaria, Slovakia. Now, Slovakia announced that they were going to in the summer, but I don't know if that's ever gone through. I certainly haven't seen any visual evidence of former Slovakian MiG-29s in service. We know that parts have been sent, and maybe aircraft in parts that the Ukrainian, all of that is speculation. But operational aircraft that Eastern European NATO countries have, MiG-29s, the biggest batch is Poland. So everything I'm seeing right now, unless if anybody's seen something different, let me know. But it looks as though the current batch of available F-16s, primarily from Denmark and Netherlands, are probably going to go to backfill those countries as they send their 29s to potentially to Ukraine. Bulgaria has a contract for new production F-16s, but what happened is they kind of delayed that decision for so long that they need an interim aircraft now. They're not interested in putting more money into keeping their 29 fleet going. The Bulgarians also have, just on a side note, a small batch, I think it's about 8 or 10 aircraft of Su-25. That's the ground attack aircraft that we see a lot of images of in this conflict. Theirs are upgraded models. They've had a modernization. I believe it might have been with Israeli help. But they would need to backfill that capability as well. What I heard was that Slovakia was willing to transfer, but that then they needed to backfill their air defense capability, and that supposedly the Czech Republic would do that. The Czechs only fly a relatively small number of Gripens, so I don't know how that would work out. And Poland would need to backfill their MiG-29s. Secondhand F-16s would be perfect for them because they're already familiar with the newer variant F-16s. And eventually they would probably want to replace used ones with more new build. So the list of countries that want to buy new build F-16s continues to grow. But in the short run, I think that we're looking at, it's not the ideal. It's not maybe the answer that we all wanted to hear. Yeah, pilot training for F-16s is starting. An initial batch of F-16s ready to go to Ukraine. That doesn't look as though that's what's about to happen anytime in the next couple of months. I think probably a further transfer of what's left of flyable MiG-29s to the Ukrainians. I don't know, Alex, are you hearing anything on this?
No movement on that as far as I can tell. The Slovakian fleet of MiG-29 stopped flying in late August, I believe. And just like you said, there's no evidence of them showing up in Ukraine. Although obviously they had some intent to do that. I think Bulgaria has the smallest fleet of all of them. Plus, I think they're just going to fly them until they're absolutely done in late 2023. So I don't think they're going to be very useful. The airframes for Ukraine, I think they're going to be absolutely done. Plus, there's very few of them, and Bulgaria politically doesn't seem to be too keen to transfer anything. I think some Bulgarian businesses have been allowed to, but the government itself has not. So it definitely seems like the Slovakian ones will probably be the first ones to come if there's any movement on that, but no evidence of that just yet. There might be minor modifications required. They did get some Western IFF systems installed when they were upgraded about in the mid-2000s, so maybe they want to take those off first. So that's a remaining fleet of 9 single-seaters and 2 twin-seaters, but only about half of them were were flying at any given time in the last 6-7 years. So it's not clear to me if they could all be made flight worthy, or if it's even worth it if they're going to come in one piece, or if, depending on the exact situation and the exact needs, it is conceivable that uh, Ukraine might be able to benefit just from large modules coming off of them. For example, if you're short on engines, maybe it's just as good to just get the engines from the Slovakian MiGs to get an equivalent number of your own MiGs flying again. So, that's kind of a thing we may not be able to see. One last thing on the Slovakian MiGs. They have nice shelters built for them at their one fighter jet base. So satellite pictures are not going to be helpful with that, because whether they're in the shelters or not, we can't tell. And the agreement for Slovakia's air defense, I believe, involved both the Czech Republic and Poland contributing while Slovakia waits for their F-16s to show up. And the Bulgarian Su-25s are very nice. They were upgraded in Belarus. There's very few of them, but those would be very helpful. But I don't think they're coming.
Yeah, and I guess so. This goes into the parts piece. The word that some people might be familiar with is cannibalization. I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me is the engines piece, because we know that there's lower time. But that also, I'll bring this up in a second. I'll give it to Jeff. But how they've changed the maintenance paradigm in Ukraine. But we'll go to Jeff first.
Yeah. Hey, Carlos, I wanted to let everyone know that I just reached out to a buddy who's a air battle manager, retired, full colonel. And he's actually in Saudi Arabia right now. His call sign's Bull Kirkendall. He and I went to weapons school together, graduated from weapons school together. He is a C2 air battle manager guru. He's listening in right now, but he's trying to figure out how he jumps up to talk. So Bull, if you can hear us and you can figure out how to jump up, we welcome you up, buddy. And that's all I got.
Is he doing this from his phone, Jeff?
He is doing it from his phone. He doesn't have a Twitter account yet, so he's listening in as just an open user, and he's frantically trying to figure out how to create a Twitter account. So should be about 5-10 minutes, and he'll jump up. So if you could just shelve the C2 question for a little bit, I think we might have a good guy to be able to respond.
Well done, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. I guess I just wanted to go quickly back to the cannibalization of parts, and especially engines, Alex. So I guess some of the anecdotal accounts I've gotten are that they can drop an engine relatively quickly now and have one that's ready to go. So they've basically, they can send those out to where they're servicing them, and they pretty much have replacements there. Obviously does not solve the airframe problem, but that's one specific thing. And then I'm going to look for the term here, because there's basically, everybody knows that there's like high time on your engines, and a point where you basically have to stop for any given part. But Alex, I guess more thoughts on that piece from you, and then I'm going to look for this term real quick.
Yeah, I mean, swapping engines is not a problem. The base maintenance squadron is equipped to do that, so that's a pretty quick process. The actual process of, if you have an engine that needs some internal work, overhauling it, that's the part that takes time and requires unique tooling and facilities to do. Which I think we've spoken before about how, or at least have written about it, about Ukraine being able to do it basically a full cycle for all these engines. Although the pace at which they can do it really would support pretty limited operations, which was acceptable for the relatively low pace of training flights that was in place for the last few years, but it would be really limiting now. There's, in the MiG-29 case, there is one more place you could go, and that's Poland, to get your engines overhauled. So that's an option that's probably not there for the Su-27 fleet, for example. The time between overhaul for the MiG-29 engines is 350 hours, which is exactly 50% of the time between overhaul for the airframe. Now, I don't think you're ever really going to hit the airframe overhaul limit, and even if you did, there's a lot of things you could do just in base maintenance, almost any major part comes off, is replaceable, can be cannibalized. Major repairs can be carried out with help from somebody from the repair factory, from the repair plant, and the EVSO engines, I think, will definitely be your limiting factor. Avionics is pretty bad too. I mean, traditionally, there was never enough working radars for like the flying MiG-29s. Same with the Su-27s, right? If we go back maybe 15 years, the entire active fleet of Su-27s was something like 15, 16 aircraft that were only flying an average of maybe 25 hours a year. So a few times less than they would fly this year. But even then, there wasn't enough working radars for all those aircraft. So what the situation is now, I don't know, but it's also going to be a challenge. Now, engines, 350-hour limit turn into a pumpkin when you hit. You may be able to continue using it. Performance may be degraded. I'm not sure if there's specific limits that you could exceed, but there are risks associated with that. So you might be able to keep going, but the flip side of that is you may not even be able to reach 350 hours because the engine has to be pulled for either a scheduled overhaul or an unscheduled repair. And with all the low-level flying going on, I think your chances of being able to reach overhaul without requiring some kind of unscheduled repair are reduced. So it's going to be a difficult situation, and ultimately, like I said, the pace of flying is very low right now. Part of that, I believe, is to conserve the limited life of all these components. When we talk about looking at this Western fighter versus this other Western fighter and how many hours of maintenance per hour flight time you need, I don't think it really accounts for the realities of all the shuffling of parts and the cannibalization that's going on with the MiG-29 fleet or the Su-27 fleet or all the other fleets. I think it takes a lot of effort to keep, stripping parts from working aircraft, and this aircraft's got working engines, this aircraft's got a working radar but no engines, so you gotta patch them into one working airplane before the next flight. It's a lot of effort, especially for an aircraft that ultimately doesn't really have the capability that is required in case the conflict in the air intensifies again, which could happen with very little warning.
And so this goes